How's it going, everybody? It's me, Logan Joyce, aka Suburban Yinzer. I'm down here in the south side of Pittsburgh, my ancestors' homeland. And as you can see, I'm on the corner of 27th and Jane. So Jane Street is running this direction and 27th Street is running this direction. So for many again that don't know, my ancestors have lived in this part of Pittsburgh, in the south side of Pittsburgh, since 1847. So this place behind me, Chipka's Cafe, Chipka's 1, this is, I would say, 48 or 50 South 27th Street. So this building right here, to my back right, that building was owned by my great-great-grandparents, Charlie and Minnie Riebel, back in the early 1900s to about 1936, 37, 38, during the end of the Great Depression. This building right here on the corner of 27th and Jane, that is 2701 Jane Street. This was owned by my great-grandfather, Joe Gelati, in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. That was a shoe shop. So the bottom of the store, you see the bottom store window right there? That was the front of the shoe shop. So my great-grandfather, Joe Gelati, my great-grandmother, Mary Gelati, they were Italians. Now the Riebels, who owned the bar called Riebel's Bar on South 27th Street on the corner of 27th and Jane, they were Germans. They were born in the 1870s, and the Gelatis were born in the 1890s or 1900s. So that bar right there was owned and operated by the Riebels for many different decades, going into the late 19th century to the early 20th century. Now the Riebels and the Gelatis, who are also related to the Arias, which are my great-great-grandparents, the Arias were Italians too. They were off the boat from Italy. Grandpa Gelati was able to acquire that building, or that shoe shop on 2701 Jane Street, because of the familial relations or the neighborly relations between the Riebels and the Arias. Because back in the early 1900s, in the 1910s and 20s, the Arias lived going down 27th Street, a couple doors down. So the Arias, which were my great-great-grandparents, were friends and neighbors with my great-great-grandparents, Charlie and Minnie Riebel, who owned Riebel's Bar. So going into the 1920s, Charlie and Minnie Riebel's daughter, Marie Riebel Joyce, my grandfather's mother, she was friends with my great-grandma, Mary Gelati, Mary Aria Gelati. So when my great-grandpa, Joe Gelati, many again know him as Joe the Shoemaker, he was able to acquire that storefront because of his wife, Mary Aria Gelati. Grandma Gelati was friends and neighbors with the Riebels for many different decades. And I do believe, and I'm not exactly 100% sure, but I think that they owned the property, or they had some type of relations to the property in the early 1900s, or they knew the owners, so to speak. So they were able to help my great-grandfather get that storefront in the late 1920s, early 1930s, to be able to acquire it, to make it his shoe shop. So right now I went further down the street on Jane Street. So right now we're at this angle where you can see the bar right down there. But over here used to be, I believe, 2708 Jane Street. 2708 Jane Street is where my grandfather, Mooch Joyce, and his parents and his family members lived in the 1940s and 1950s, before my great-grandparents, Scrappy and Marie Joyce, moved to Castle Shannon. They lived right in this lot, right here. So that just shows how close they were to Riebel's Bar, which was right there, which at the time, Riebel's Bar was not, I don't believe it was owned or operated still by the Riebels, because Charlie, my great-great-grandfather, who was the owner, died in 1936. So I think the Riebels lost ownership going into 1940, 41, 42, the World War II generation. So when the Joyces lived here in the 1940s and 1950s, they were neighbors down the street. So if you look this direction, you can see right there on the corner 2701 Jane Street. That house right down there, that was, as I already said, my great grandparents' house, Joe and Mary Gelati. Their daughter, Rose Marie Gelati Joyce, is my grandma. So my grandfather, Mooch Joyce, lived here at 2708 Jane Street. But his future wife lived right there at 2701 Jane Street. So as you can see, and as you might figure, that is how my grandparents eventually met. They knew each other during the 40s and 50s. But since my grandfather, Mooch, who died 30 years ago today, March 9th, 1995, he was in the Navy, in the Air Force during the 40s and 50s. So he wasn't ready to settle down yet because of his traveling around the world in the military, being stationed in many different parts of the world and exploring different countries and continents. But by the time he came back to Southside, or by the time he was able to come back permanently and stationed in Pittsburgh as a recruiter, he was about in his late 20s, early 30s, and he was able to settle down. So then he would later eventually marry my grandma, Rose Gelati, who was living at 2701 Jane Street going into 1959 when she was in her mid-20s, about my age. So that is how the Joyces, the Gelatis, the Arias, the Rebels. Well, the Joyces and the Rebels, so the people that own that bar right there, that own Chipka's 1 on the corner of 27th and Jane, that's the Rebels. Let's just say that they're directly related to the Joyces. So the Joyces and the Rebels are one group of people. So they're one family. But then you have the Gelatis and the Arias, who are then another group of people. So those are the Italians, and the Rebels and the Joyces are the German and Irish. So you got two different type groups of people. That is how I differentiate it for Yins, because many Yins are probably watching this video saying, what the hell is he talking about? But if Yins know my ancestors, you know that this part, or this area of Southside, just this area alone is very significant and very historical for me, because this isn't just some part of the city. This is my ancestors' homeland. This is where my ancestors have been living and walking for decades, centuries, mind you, probably since 1847. Like I said, these streets and these sidewalks, like this sidewalk alone, this was walked up and down by not only my grandparents or my great-grandparents, but my great-great-grandparents, distant cousins, the Herkas, the Haunts, the Arias, the Gelatis, the Joyces, the Rebels. You know, my great aunt and uncle, Uncle Mike and Aunt Lena, they lived right there. Let me just get that angle right there. I believe that they lived in that apartment right there across the street from, this is Jane Street coming down this way. So they lived right here. So as you can see, there is a style of residences. There's a style of living down here. And at the time, this was known as the neighborhood. It was referred to as the neighborhood by my father and by my distant cousins still today. This was known as the neighborhood. I mean, everybody stayed in the general vicinity. I mean, you really didn't leave Southside. And not only that, it was like that with every different neighborhood in Pittsburgh, or even any different neighborhood in America at the time, whereas families stuck together, meaning that if something would go wrong, or there would be financial health disputes or health problems or financial problems, or vice versa, the family members were able to convene and help each other out. Meaning that, like you have the Rebels right there, the Gelatis right there, the Herkas, the Joyces. I mean, you have all of these different groups of people that are related, not just by blood, but maybe by in-law, family, marriage, regardless. But they're able to help each other out. They're able to convene. And not only that, but also the neighbors too. So going down this way too, if you look down this way, down Jane Street, you can see that many of these houses were resided by the neighbors, friends, the family members. I mean, like my dad told me, that these people that lived in these houses 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, they weren't just strangers. They weren't just like people that didn't care about my ancestors. They were the friends and family members that contributed, that helped out. I mean, I don't know them personally. I don't know many of their names, but maybe some of my family members will know, or other Sassiders. But these people that lived in these houses decades ago, they were essentially family, because this was a neighborhood. This was a community. And that is exactly what I miss. That is exactly what I envy about living in the 21st century, is that, yes, we have many technological advances. We have many benefits of having technology, but we don't have the dependability and, let's just say, the community, the relations, the social connections that we used to, let's just say, in the 70s and before, maybe the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, the 50s. I mean, life was better in so many ways 80, 90, 100 years ago than it is today. We think that we're so evolved and we're so lucky to have phones and computers and internet. But I feel that, in my personal opinion, as a kid in his mid-20s, I feel that maybe my ancestors had it better than me. Because maybe when you could walk down the street and visit your grandparents right there, or visit your aunts and uncles right there, or these neighbors right here, oh, I need help. Oh, you want to go down to the grocery store, or you want to go down to Joe's shoe shop and get your shoes repaired, or do you want to go down to the bar with your neighbors? I mean, there was so much community, there was so much relationships, friendships, and you were able to have fun and to prosper and thrive in a community that was very bonded by decades and decades and decades of shared memories. And that's essentially what I miss about the world today. And that's exactly what I'm jealous of and I'm envious of about my father and his grandparents, and his parents and grandparents, is that they lived in a world where life was so much better, so much more simpler than today.